Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? It helps us make quality content for you. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Jack stood at the edge of his ranch staring at the sight in front of him. His heart pounded, his fists clenched tight at his sides. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the rolling hills, but nothing about the view could soothe his growing anger. In front of him was a fence, a tall wooden structure that had gone up over the past few days, blocking the access road that led to his property. The road he had used for years to get to his land, to his home, to his livelihood. He inhaled deeply. The smell of freshly cut wood mixed with the sharp scent of wet earth reached his nostrils. The sounds of hammering and machinery still echoed through the air. Though the workers were packing up for the day, the fence was finished. Now it stood solid and immovable, a reminder of just how little control he had over his own land. This wasn't just any fence, though. It wasn't some private property line. No, this was something worse. The fence had been put up by the HOA, and it wasn't just blocking a portion of the road, it was blocking his entire access to the ranch. The gate he had used every day was now completely sealed off. No warning, no discussion, no permission. His mind raced, his feet moved him closer to the fence. He reached out to touch it, feeling the rough wood under his fingers as if it could somehow make sense of the mess in his head. There was no sign of the workers anymore. No one was around to answer his questions, no one to explain why this was happening. It was Karen, the HOA representative, the one behind this mess. Jack had already had enough run-ins with her over the years, each one more infuriating than the last. Her smugness had a way of rubbing him the wrong way. Every time she'd visited his property, she'd had some ridiculous demand or complaint about the tiniest things. She always claimed to be enforcing the rules. But to Jack, it felt like she was just trying to assert control over people who couldn't fight back. He turned away from the fence and stormed off to his truck, his mind still spinning. Karen had crossed a line. This time she wasn't just harassing him with rules. She was outright stealing his access to his own home, his sanctuary. The drive to the HOA office was filled with a boiling mix of anger and determination. Jack's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white as he tried to keep his cool. This wasn't just about principle anymore. This was about his livelihood, his privacy, and his home. He parked outside the HOA building and marched inside, his boots clicking sharply against the tile floor. He didn't bother to greet the receptionist or anyone else. He knew the way to Karen's office. He knocked once before opening the door without waiting for permission. Karen was sitting at her desk flipping through some papers. When she looked up, she didn't seem surprised by his sudden entrance. Just a flicker of irritation in her eyes, like she'd been expecting him all along. "Jack," she said coolly, "what can I do for you today?" "Explain the fence," he said, his voice low but steady. He wasn't about to let her off easy this time. "Why the hell is there a fence blocking my property?" Karen raised an eyebrow as if his question was beneath her. "It's a new development," she said, her voice condescending. "We're just making some improvements around the neighborhood." "Improvements?" Jack repeated the word like it was foreign to him. "You're blocking my access to my own land. That's not an improvement, that's theft." She smiled, that infuriating smile that Jack had come to know too well. "The HOA voted on it," she said. "It's part of the new community safety initiative. We're protecting the integrity of the neighborhood." Jack clenched his jaw. "You're not protecting anything. You're making it impossible for me to even get to my ranch." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, but her expression remained unflappable. "If you'd read the new rules, you'd know this was coming," she said. "The fence was approved at the last board meeting." Jack was done being reasonable. He could feel the anger building inside him, but he bit his tongue as hard as it was to do so. He had to think this through. He needed to get the facts first. He needed to make sure he wasn't missing something before he went charging in. "Let me talk to the board," Jack said, his voice firm. "I'll take this up with them." Karen sighed dramatically, as if he was wasting her time. "You can, but the decision's final," she said. "The HOA is not going to reverse it, so don't waste your time." That was the moment Jack knew he was in trouble. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistake. This was a deliberate action, something calculated, and Karen was standing right in the middle of it all. "Don't you dare think you can just do this and get away with it," Jack snapped. I'll fight you on this. I'll take it to court if I have to. Karen's smile grew wider, and Jack hated her for it. I'm sure you will, she said sweetly. But good luck with that. I'm sure the board will be happy to defend the decision. Jack stood there for a moment staring at her. He wanted to shout. He wanted to throw something. But he knew it wouldn't help. He was out of options for now. All he could do was leave. But he didn't walk out of that office quietly. He left with a sense of finality, like he was walking into a battle. He knew he couldn't afford to. He slammed the door behind him as he left the office, his mind already racing with what he needed to do next. This was far from over. Jack knew that now he would have to find a way to take them down, and he would do whatever it took to get his land back. The war had just begun. Jack spent the next few days stewing in frustration. Each time he drove past the fence, he felt his blood boil. The sight of it was like a personal affront to him. His land had always been his sanctuary, a place of peace where he could escape from the chaos of the outside world. Now that sense of freedom was gone. He sat at his kitchen table staring at the legal documents he had gathered to prove the fence was illegal. Zoning laws and property records laid out in front of him. But nothing seemed to make sense. It was clear the fence violated his rights, but the HOA had carefully crafted their defense using legal jargon that seemed impossible to pierce. Jack sighed and rubbed his temples as the phone rang. He knew who it was before he even answered it. Karen's voice was unmistakable. It was smooth and calculated, with an edge of superiority. Jack, she said almost cheerfully, I'm just calling to remind you that the HOA is very serious about this project. We're moving forward with it whether you like it or not, Karen. He replied, his voice tight with barely contained anger. This fence is illegal. You have no right to block my access to my land. Karen's response was dripping with mock sympathy. Oh, Jack, I'm so sorry you feel that way, but the decision's been made. It's final. The HOA won't be reversing it. Jack's grip on the phone tightened. I'll take you to court if I have to. I'm not letting you get away with this. She laughed softly. On the other end of the line, well, good luck with that. The HOA has plenty of resources and lawyers ready to defend us. You won't win. The call ended with her hanging up before Jack had a chance to respond. He stared at the phone. His anger simmering under the surface. Karen was acting like she had already won. But Jack knew he couldn't back down. Not now. The next morning, Jack called his lawyer, David, a friend who had been handling his affairs for years. David was no stranger to the HOA's antics. He had helped Jack navigate through countless disputes over the years, but this one felt different. David, Jack said when his friend answered the phone, I need your help with something big. The HOA has put up an illegal fence on my property and they're refusing to take it down. David paused for a moment before replying. That's a pretty serious accusation, Jack. Have you spoken to them about it? I tried. Jack said, his voice laced with frustration, but Karen's not listening. She thinks she can do whatever she wants, and she's using the HOA's power to bully me into submission. David's voice turned serious. All right. I'll look into it. But you need to be prepared for a long fight. These HOA battles can get ugly. Jack nodded, even though he knew David couldn't see him. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. David promised to investigate the situation and get back to him. But Jack didn't have high hopes. He knew that the HOA had deep pockets and a team of lawyers who could drag this out for months or even years. He needed to find another way to fight back. Over the next few days, Jack spent hours researching the HOA's legal history, reading through old meeting minutes and zoning codes, anything that could give him an advantage. He also began talking to his neighbors who had similar complaints about Karen and the board members. Their stories were all too familiar. Overzealous enforcement of petty rules, unfair fines, and constant harassment. One afternoon, Jack met with Mark, a neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. Mark was one of the few people who had stood up to the HOA in the past, and Jack hoped he could offer some advice. You know, the HOA has been a problem for years, Mark said, shaking his head. They think they run the place like they're the law, but they're just a bunch of power-hungry people with no regard for anyone else's property rights. I know, Jack replied. But this fence is different. It's blocking my access to my land, and they're not even trying to hide it. Mark nodded thoughtfully. The only way to win against them is to hit them where it hurts. They don't care about the law. they care about, their reputation and their power. Jack's eyes lit up with a spark of realization. Reputation, he muttered to himself. That's it. Mark smiled. Exactly, if you want to take them down, you have to make them look bad in front of the community. They can't afford to lose their image. Jack stood up, feeling a sense of urgency wash over him. I have to make this public. I need to show the whole neighborhood what they're doing. Mark slapped him on the back. You've got it, kid, now. You just need to get the word out and make sure everyone knows who the real villains are. Jack left Mark's house with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the fight was far from over, but now he had a plan. He wasn't going to let Karen and the HOA bully him into submission. He would take them down by exposing their actions to the public. He would make sure everyone knew what they had done. That evening, Jack sat at his computer typing out a post for social media. He didn't know if it would work, but he knew he had to try. He outlined the details of the fence, the zoning violations, the HOA's refusal to negotiate, and he included a picture of the fence blocking his access. It wasn't just a complaint. It was evidence. When he hit send, he felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. This could go one of two ways. It could either fall flat, or it could spark a movement. But Jack knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Karen and the HOA win without a fight. As the post began to gain traction, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe this time the tide would turn in his favor. Maybe the people in the community would finally see the truth and rally behind him. Maybe this time he wouldn't have to fight alone. Jack watched as the likes and comments poured in on his post. He had expected a few reactions, but what he saw was a tidal wave of support from his neighbors, and even some from people outside the community. Everyone seemed to agree this fence was wrong. They couldn't believe the HOA had the audacity to do this to someone's property. Jack felt a rush of satisfaction seeing his phone light up with notifications. It was working. People were starting to take notice. Karen and the HOA were not prepared for this kind of backlash by the time they realized what was happening. The post had already gone viral. Local news outlets had picked up on the story, and soon Jack found himself getting calls from reporters asking for interviews. He never expected this kind of attention, but now he had a platform to make his case, and he wasn't going to waste it. The next day, Jack stood in front of his property as a local news crew set up their cameras. They were there to cover the growing controversy over the fence, and Jack was more than happy to give them an interview. Karen had tried to call him several times since his post went live, but Jack had ignored every one of her attempts. Now she was going to have to face him on the public stages. The reporter adjusted the microphone. Jack took a deep breath. He was about to speak to an audience much larger than his neighborhood, but this was his chance to make things right, and he wasn't going to hold back. Jack, the reporter began, can you explain what's happening here and why this fence is such a problem for you? Jack squared his shoulders and looked directly into the camera. This fence is illegal, plain and simple. It blocks my access to my property, and the HOA has no right to do that. He paused, letting the words sink in. I've lived here for years, and I've never had any problems with the HOA. Until now, this fence was built without my consent, and it's violating zoning laws. The reporter nodded encouragingly. And how has the HOA responded to your concerns? Jack's jaw clenched at the thought of Karen's smug face. Karen from the HOA has been dismissive from the start. She refuses to listen to reason and keeps hiding behind legal jargon and empty promises. She thinks she can do whatever she wants just because she's in charge, but she's wrong. Jack's voice rose with passion. I'm not going to let her get away with this. As the interview ended, Jack felt a wave of satisfaction. He had made his case, but he knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead of him. Karen was not going to take this lying down, and he was sure the HOA would try to find a way to silence him. But Jack was ready for whatever came. Next, he wasn't afraid of them anymore. The following week, Jack received a letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice accusing him of slander. For his social media post, they claimed he had damaged the HOA's reputation and demanded that he take down the post and issue an apology. Immediately, Jack wasn't surprised by the move. He had known the HOA would fight back, but this only fueled his determination. They were trying to intimidate him into backing down, and Jack wasn't going to let that happen. He showed the letter to David, his lawyer, who laughed when he read it. This is ridiculous, David said, shaking his head. They're just trying to scare you into submission. Don't let them get away with this. Jack agreed he wasn't about to apologize or take down his post. It was his right to speak out, and the HOA was only proving their guilt by trying to silence him instead of addressing the real issue. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and more media interviews as Jack continued to gain support from his community. He even started a petition calling for the HOA to tear down the fence and lift the restrictions on his land. The petition quickly gained traction as more and more people signed on. People who had once been too afraid to speak out against the HOA were now joining his cause. But as the pressure mounted, Jack noticed a shift in the way Karen was handling the situation. She had always been arrogant and dismissive, but now there was a hint of desperation in her actions. She started showing up at his property unannounced, demanding to meet with him to discuss the issue. But Jack wasn't interested in listening to her anymore. He had made his position clear, and he wasn't going to let her manipulate him any longer. One afternoon, as Jack stood outside his house staring at the fence, he saw Karen approaching with a smug smile on her face. He knew she was about to try to talk him into backing down, but Jack wasn't in the mood for negotiations. "Jack," she said sweetly as she walked up to him, "I just wanted to clear the air and see if we can come to an agreement about this whole fence situation." "I don't want to talk to you, Karen," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've made your choice and so have I. This isn't about compromise anymore." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Jack, you're making a mistake. You don't understand the bigger picture here," she said in a tone that was too calm to be genuine. Jack shook his head. "No, Karen, you're the one who doesn't understand. You've messed with the wrong person and now you're going to pay for it." Karen's expression turned cold as she realized that Jack wasn't going to back down this time. "You'll regret this, Jack," she warned, her voice low and threatening. But Jack didn't flinch. He had come too far to be intimidated as she turned and walked away. Jack knew the war was far from over, but he also knew that he had the upper hand. Now the tide had shifted and the HOA was starting to crack under the pressure. They thought they could control everything, but they had underestimated him. They had underestimated the power of the people who were now rallying behind him. Jack's phone buzzed again. It was a message from David. The legal team had found a serious flaw in the HOA's zoning permit. The fence had been built on land that didn't belong to them, and now they had the evidence to prove it. Jack smiled to himself as he read the message. Things were finally starting to fall into place, and he was more determined than ever to take Karen and the HOA down once and for all. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon. Jack stood in front of the courthouse, his heart thudding in his chest, as he glanced around at the sea of onlookers gathered to witness the battle between him and the HOA. His supporters stood on one side ready to back him up, while Karen and her team of lawyers took their place on the other side. A smug smile painted across her face, as if she knew the outcome already. Jack wasn't so sure, but he had one thing going for him: the truth. He entered the courtroom with a quiet resolve. The room was tense as the judge took his seat, and the proceedings began. Jack's lawyer, David, had prepped him well, but nothing could prepare him for the sheer weight of the situation. The HOA had pulled out all the stops. They had brought in experts to testify about the legality of the fence. They had a mountain of paperwork and legal jargon that Jack barely understood. They were ready to bury him under their resources. Karen stood at the front with her head held high and a smug look on her face. She seemed so sure of herself, so certain that she would win, that it made Jack's blood boil. Her arrogance only pushed him harder. As the hearing unfolded, Jack found himself increasingly frustrated. Karen's lawyers were twisting every word and manipulating every fact. They had even called in a supposed expert who testified that the fence met all legal requirements. Jack knew it was all a lie, but proving it would take more than just words. It would take evidence that would expose the HOA's corruption for everyone to see. Finally, it was his turn to speak. Jack took a deep breath and stood up slowly. The room fell silent as he walked to the stand. His palms were sweaty, but his mind was clear. He wasn't about to back down now. "I'm here today because the HOA has broken the law and is trying to take my land." Jack's voice was steady, but the words hit like a hammer. "This fence is illegal. It blocks my access to my property, and the HOA refuses to do anything about it. They've ignored my concerns and tried to intimidate me into giving up, but I won't back down." Karen's lawyers tried to interrupt, but Jack held up his hand and continued, "I've done the research, I've spoken to experts, and I've gathered the evidence to prove that the fence doesn't belong here. It's on land that doesn't belong to the HOA, and they know it. There was a murmur in the courtroom as Jack dropped the bombshell. He could see Karen's face fall for the first time. There was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a false smile. Jack didn't care about her smile. He knew he had them cornered. David stood up and handed the judge a stack of papers. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we've compiled the official zoning records and property maps that show the fence encroaches on Jack's land. The HOA has no legal right to build on this property, and we have proof that they knowingly violated zoning laws." The judge looked over the documents carefully, and the room grew eerily quiet. Jack's heart raced in his chest, but he knew there was no turning back now. After what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat and spoke. "I've reviewed the evidence, and it's clear that the HOA has overstepped its bounds." He paused and looked directly at Karen. "The fence must be removed immediately, and the HOA is to cease any further actions that impede Mr. Harper's rights to his land." Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was happening. It was really happening. The judge had ruled in his favor. Karen's face drained of color, and her carefully constructed composure cracked. She stood frozen for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing, but the reality of the decision began to sink in. She turned and shot Jack a glare filled with venom, but Jack only smiled. "He had done it, Your Honor," Karen said, her voice shaking with fury. "This is not the end. We will appeal this decision." But Jack could see the cracks in her facade. She was grasping at straws. Now she had lost, and she knew it. Jack's supporters erupted into cheers in the courtroom. They had won the battle. But Jack knew this was more than just a legal victory. It was a statement. It was a moment of justice that would resonate throughout the community. The HOA could no longer bully people without facing the consequences. As Jack walked out of the courthouse, the weight that had been hanging over him for so long lifted. He looked up at the sky, and for the first time in weeks he felt free. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned in his favor, and he knew that Karen and the HOA would never have the same hold on the community again. Later that night, as Jack sat on his porch watching the sunset, he received a message from David with a screenshot of a news article about the court ruling. The headline read, "Homeowner wins landmark case against HOA." Jack smiled to himself and leaned back in his chair for a moment of peace, but just as he was about to relax, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Mark, his neighbor. "Hey, Jack." Mark wrote, "I just wanted to say thanks for standing up to the HOA. You've inspired a lot of us around here. We're all behind you." Jack smiled and typed a reply. "Thanks, Mark. It means a lot." As he set the phone down, Jack glanced over at the now empty lot where the illegal fence once stood. The land was his again, and it was a victory not just for him but for everyone who had ever been pushed around by the HOA's overbearing control. Jack had fought back and won, and now the community was stronger for it. Jack stood up and took a deep breath. The battle was over, but he knew there would always be more challenges ahead. But for now he had his land back and the satisfaction of knowing he had taken down the villain in the story and come out victorious in the end.